Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors consisting of some of the best tech leaders in the world, people you may have never heard of, but who in just an hour you'll know their unfiltered career story, the bets they took, the decisions they made, where they failed, and the lessons that they learned along the way. Welcome to the What Makes You Tick podcast. Randy, welcome to the podcast. It's a pleasure to have you on.
I am so excited to be here.
I'm very excited for our conversation. You've had a very interesting career journey, so I'm looking forward to getting into that. But before we start that, the real question is, what makes you tick, Randy?
Curiosity.
Okay.
You know, as a child, I had the fortunate upbringing to live overseas, and from the get-go, just been extremely curious about, culture, language, just people, and that curiosity carried into why I ended up being a scientist and actually why I'm such a great go-to market leader. But yeah, just I want to understand, truly understand.
What would you say has been the best experience or the best outcome or something really interesting that's happened from you being really curious?
I would say the things that I've got to explore or do because I was so curious. When I was younger, I thought I wanted to be an archaeologist. And so on my own, I, all the hieroglyphic characters, I copied them, learned what they meant, you know, found books on how to phonetically say stuff. And that's me, like, super focused when I'm curious about something. I just want to understand, right? Now, obviously, I didn't end up being an archaeologist, but it's still, whenever there's an opportunity, I live in Dallas. There was an exhibit here. I've seen an exhibit in the Louvre in Paris
Wow.
on Egyptology and mummies, etc. It's still something that just fascinates me, how their written language and how we translated it, and just very curious. So, yeah.
That's amazing. That's amazing. And it sounds like it links slightly into what you mentioned. So you mentioned that you were a scientist. So I would love to hear a bit more about your career journey.
Mm-hmm.
You started with science, now you're in tech sales. So how did that happen?
Sure. So, I was very fortunate that I had a scholarship to university in Canada, and actually started out engineering because I'm really good at math and physics. And as I was going through the program, they're like, even though you're doing really well, when you get to the internship, we'll know if this is for you or not. And so I ended up switching from engineering into research science, so with a clinical background. And throughout that, the curiosity of how our body works and how diseases happen and what we can do from a drug perspective, or where I kind of focused on was like helping make blood products safer. So if anyone needed a transfusion, they didn't get a disease. There were just so many different opportunities to explore. I actually thought I wanted to be a forensic pathologist once I started doing that because I was so curious about the structure and function of the body. And being a scientist, you're trained to fail. That's what experimenting is. And so that's one of the best things outside of curiosity is you have you have this natural tendency to be resilient and adapt and iterate, because you're always trying to do something better. And it's data driven, right? Like you use data to make those decisions. So all of those things translated really well into business. I learned as a scientist, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. And so from the very get go, as an individual contributor, learned, documenting, looked for patterns, and when I exceeded revenue goals and they said, "Hey, can you take on a team?" I'm like, "Yeah, I can train other people," because when I was in the lab, I ran a lab. So I had, 60 plus people under me. It's not like I hadn't managed people before. So that didn't scare me. And I was like, "Sure, I can teach other people how to drive revenue." And I ended up building a team of 17 very quickly,
Mm.
and I put it down to the documentation and the fact that I've been a leader before. People have different learning styles, but I documented like insanely. And so when people come on, when they onboarded, I could show them what I did. I created frameworks so you could adapt it so that person can show up authentically to do their role. I didn't want them to be a robot. And as a team, we exceeded, revenue goals. Other teams in the startup that I was at were struggling. And I really put it down to that documentation
Mm.
and really encouraging people to be curious. I talk about failing forward.
Yeah.
I really don't like the word failure. I like the science word experiment.
Mm.
And what we're doing is looking at data and saying, what is the one thing that I can change that might make a difference? And so I always talk about everything we do, we're experimenting. That's what A/B testing is, right? Whether
Mm.
it's marketing, sales, it is that testing is experimenting. And I don't think failure is a dirty word. I just think that a lot of us have been conditioned that, oh, we can't fail. So I talk about failing forward and always 1% better. What can we do? What one
Mm.
thing can we do that will improve us today?
So one thing I'm really curious about is how do you get people to engage with documentation? Because often documentation isn't there, but I think that a lot of people struggle with when the documentation is there. How do you get people to actually engage with it, to read it, to do what's in it?
Yeah. So back in the day, I would say it is, well, first off, documentation is not glamorous, right? Like,
No.
let's be honest, is not the fun part of the role, right? Like,
Yeah,
let's be
yeah,
honest.
yeah.
Um, so once again, you got to make it digestible, right? So one of my other skill sets from being a scientist is being able to take something very complex and make it simple. And so
Mm.
I was always, even though I had all this documentation from a training perspective, how can I take these 10 things and make them super simple? So I'm a
Mm.
huge fan of like infographics, cheat sheets, and now, oh my gosh, we have video, so you can do Loom. I wish I
Yeah.
had that when before. Now I do Looms all the time, like, and you know, um, that is just so helpful because you can actually talk someone through something or show them something.
Mm.
And now we also have with AI practice stuff, right? All these things I did without all this technology before. So I'm so fortunate we are where we are now. But
Mm.
role play,
Yeah.
the easiest way to get someone comfortable is role play. I know some people get shy about that, but I think as a leader, if you really express your intent is for them to get comfortable and get better,
Mm.
and you provide a safe environment, people will show up for that. And everyone learns differently. And so that was also part of my job as a leader is even though I had all this material and what worked for one person might not work for another person. And so
Mm.
once again, finding out, being curious about how that person learns and what makes it easier for them. Some people just need to do. Some people just like, okay, I understand you show me, but I need to do it myself. Okay. So how can we do that in a safe environment where you can do it and I'm there to support you? Right.
Mm. Mm.
So, I think that's how I did it. And now with technology, it's even easier. Like all the things that we have, it's just so much easier now than what I did
Mm.
before. But I just, like I said, infographics, role plays, and then just really getting to the root of how that person learned, and serving it up.
And I think one of the things that you mentioned earlier was about failing forward, which for me links into all these things that we're talking about now. What would you say to someone who is new to the principle of failing forward? They're a leader, they want their team to start failing forward. How would you advise them on making it happen, making it good, and making it safe for their teams?
Sure. Yeah, this is where, as a leader, you have to be vulnerable. You have to share your mistakes, what you learn from them. And people need to see you as is number one, human, and that as someone who's made mistakes, and that it's okay, and what you learned, and that you truly are creating this learning environment by making mistakes. And honestly, I also share that, you know, I will never be upset with someone if they come to me and say, this is what I learned and this is what I'm going to do differently. So
Yeah.
showing them what good looks like when you're failing forward, right? And giving them a concrete way to move forward. And it is uncomfortable. And my team, I'm always like, lean in. And to them, when they hear that, that means like, this is where they need to push through, because that where they're uncomfortable is where they need to grow.
Mm. And I think what I love about the concept of failing forward is that even though you feel like you've lost, you've still moved forward, because you're not in the same place you were before. Now, okay, this doesn't work. I need to find something else, which is still progress. It's all about making progress.
Right. And that's 100% true. And like I said, as a leader, you just have to be vulnerable with your team and, show them that it is safe. And how you do that is by sharing your mistakes and being accountable. And, I make mistakes all the time, but I always share what I learned and what I'll do differently, what my thought process was. And what made me change my thinking, whatever the case may be. And I think that goes a long way, because, people can relate to that as well, and they can learn from it.
Would you mind sharing one of the situations where you feel you made a mistake and that you were able to learn something really good from it?
Yeah. So, I was a Boomerang employee. And so I came back, to an organization, and, because I came back, I moved too fast with the current team. The current team was new to me. So, I was about a month in and I realized, oh my gosh, I am moving too fast. I need to slow down so we can go quicker later. And so I sat down and said, you know what? I made a mistake. I know the organization really well because I worked here before. These are the things that, I know, and this is why I moved so quickly. But in hindsight, I see the impact it had on the team. And I realized that that was not the right thing to do. So this is what we're going to do to correct it. So we can level set and move forward as a team. And I remember, one of the longer term employees, that I had not worked with but had been there for a bit, came to me and said, I've never had a leader who shared so vulnerably that they got it wrong. And I'm like, I don't know how else to be. I mean, we have to trust each other. And in order to trust each other, we have to be honest with each other.
Yeah.
So, and I always say that, actions speak louder than words. So it's not what you say, it's what you do. And so, your word is your bond. And so if you say you're going to do something, you better well do it. And if you don't, you need to talk about why you didn't do it. Maybe there's a good reason, but people are watching. And like I said, your word is your bond. So you need to be very careful with your words and when you are in a leadership role.
And I think a lot of leaders are scared that in admitting, I got this wrong, that people maybe won't trust them anymore, or people won't see them as fit to lead. I don't know if you've ever found that to be the case. I've always found that when you own up to your stuff, because we're all human, every leader is human, we're all going to make mistakes. it's almost like the trust increases with your team.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I think that this is where having a certain mindset. So as an individual, as a leader, the only person I'm competing with is myself. And I talk about this with my team as well. You know, there's having a growth mindset, but then there's also, as an individual, knowing who you are at your core and, you know, about being 1% better every day. And that's how I show up for my team. And I think where a lot of leaders get it wrong is that they're comparing themselves to maybe other people versus themselves. So as a leader, I'm always like, what can I do better as myself? What did I do yesterday that, you know, I can do today that would make it better for my team or the organization and our goals. So I think having that mindset makes all the difference. And I think people truly do respect you if you do keep your word, and if you do show them it's okay to make mistakes, and if you hold yourself accountable. I think, you know, I've been in some companies where the culture, I've seen leadership not be held accountable, and that does not set up the organization well, and the culture issues are rampant as a result, because if leadership isn't accountable, that all that rolls down, right? And you have employees who are not accountable either, or don't feel like they need to be.
And where did that mindset come from for you in terms of competing only with myself, trying to be 1% better? Was that something that you'd always had and always grown up with, or was that something that came at a certain point for you?
Yeah, that is not something that I always had. You know, there are a few things that, two things that really kind of drove this. One is, actually I have to thank my husband, Tony Robbins. He was a huge Tony Robbins fan when we got married, and had all his original like cassettes, like I'm actually cassette tapes. And he kept, you need to listen to him. You need to listen to him. And I was like, oh, no. Well, I went to an Unleash the Power Within, and there was, Tony Robbins talked about, you know, athletes, and about how sometimes, you know, 0.00 of a second makes a difference, like in a race, as an example. And the difference is someone being just like that 1% better. And he talked about the only person you're competing with is yourself. And that was a light bulb moment for me. And that really changed how I thought about myself. I've always had confidence, but that really kind of triggered my self-worth. And I look at those differently. To me, self-worth is knowing who you are at your core, regardless of your title, your situation. It doesn't matter whether you're employed or not, you're still the same person, right? Or it doesn't matter what your title is, you're still the same person. But confidence comes from doing things, having experiences, or having said you could do it. So the self-worth and the you know, that 1% difference are just things that really made a difference in my leadership style. And plus, I'll be honest, I had a bad leader early on in my career, and I knew what I didn't want to be. So I was always striving to I know what I thought good looked like, and how do you achieve that, right? And I think some of my earliest mistakes in leadership came down to you know, moving fast, and maybe not taking the time to explain things as thoroughly, explain the why, so people really understood and could lean into that themselves. People are purpose driven, and they need to know why they're doing what they're doing. And those are just, you know, a few things that have really helped me along the way.
I think that's a really, really tough balance, because especially in sales can be so fast paced, and you need to move with velocity. You need to make things happen really quickly. How have you been able to find that balance between we're in sales, we've got to move fast, and we can't move so fast that we break our people, and our people don't know why we're moving this way.
Right. So, I think that comes down to setting expectations early and often. And it goes both ways. I have to manage up to leadership, and then I have to manage the team. Right. And that is my role is, wherever we're at in the organization, whether there's a gap in revenue, whether we're doing well, I have to manage up and manage down. And you're right. It is a balance. But it's my job to translate what's happening with the team. If there's a gap, or if we're doing well, why it's going well, what we're doing differently. And when I manage up, I'm saying, yeah, if for example, we're in a gap situation, yes, we are not meeting the number here. Here is what we're doing to change it. And here's what you can expect. And so, like I said, to me, it's about setting expectations early and often, both ways. And what I have found is, number one, in sales, you have to embrace change. Just because things do change. What has worked before in the past might not work again in the future. And so one of the things about setting expectations with the team is, number one, embrace change. And if you empower your people to, do their A/B testing and use data, oftentimes they come up with better ideas because they're the closest. And I think that leaders who maybe hold on too tight, will struggle with this. But if you can work and coach and mentor and empower your staff, they're going to show up, and they're going to do better than you think they will, because who are they competing against? Themselves. They want to keep getting better.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's such a healthy culture of competition, because I think that there is an element of competing with other people that can sometimes be fun and good, but it's so easy for that to get off track and become something a bit more malicious. So I think having everybody competing with themselves, everybody trying to be the best that they can be, creates a great competitive culture within an organization or a team.
Yeah. And, I've had teams where, there's been, a bit of a gap. We've had like I'll just say a stellar seller, and then other people who are good, but they're not great. And you can't compare the two. What makes this other person, this stellar seller, what can they learn, and what can they do differently that will make them better, right? And so, like I said, I think it's really important that people learn very, very early on what can they do to be better. And if you can bring the people who are, underperforming, or, could do better, bring those up, it doesn't just have a compound effect. It has a serial effect on the team and the revenue growth that you'll experience. And then you got to keep your stellar seller happy. Like, what can you do to keep challenging them? Because you don't want a person like that getting bored.
No, that's dangerous.
Yes.
What would you say, if there's anything common that you've seen throughout your career, the differences between that good and the great seller? Like, what makes someone go from a good seller to that stellar seller that you talk about?
Well, I think that the main difference, and I'll focus on enterprise because that's where I've been most of my career. It's being honest with themselves, the stage that they're at with a customer. I talk about discovery and qualification early and often, and the difference between a stellar seller and someone who's average is oftentimes they're missing some of the cues. And, part of discovery is truly understanding the customer and, what is driving the change, and is this a problem we're solving now? And of course, someone who's new to sales or not as good at sales may lean lean more on features, benefits, that's not going to get you where you need to be. You need to have a point of view, and really challenge the customer on their thinking, of what they're doing, and how they're thinking they're going to get there, and have a point of view, and be really curious and really understand what they do. It's a higher conversation. I always say sales is just a conversation, but the better sellers raise the bar in the conversation. They don't just do the minimum. They're prepared with a point of view. I mean, all the things that, some people say they do to prepare, those are table stakes to a seller. They're going beyond and having a deeper level conversation because they understand the industry. They understand what customers look for, and they can come with a point of view. And I think that's the big difference. And it takes time and experience to get there.
What was your first sales experience like? Were you good at sales to begin with? And I would love to also to hear, how did you move from science to sales?
Yeah. So I resisted sales for a long time. My husband was like, you should go into sales. You should go into sales. And I was like, no, for a number of reasons. It wasn't about like the icky car sales person. To me, it was like, oh, the pressure of having a quota, and I was approached by a startup. It was actually a rep that I worked with, and she's like, I want you to meet my boss. Have you ever considered the commercial side of healthcare? Because I think you would be phenomenal at it. And I was like, okay, I really like my rep. And so I was like, okay, I'll entertain a conversation with your boss. So we went for lunch, and 3 hours went by, and I realized that a lot of the things, or the way that I thought, from a science really lent well to business. And I got really excited about the role. And it was a startup, and I was asked to be a strategic account manager, and I had a revenue goal for the year. And I blew it by 5 times. And when they said, do you think you can get $1 million? And I'm like, yeah, I think I can. I can do that. I can do that. Never having done it before. And I didn't just do it. I, brought in 5 million. And then they're like, well, if you can do that, we'll teach a team to do it. So, I think part of my success was, number one, when I transferred, the people that I was talking to were my peeps. Like, they were pathologists, physicians. They were people that I dealt with already in my day to day. I knew their world. I knew the pressures they were under, so it was really easy. Like, I knew my ICP cold, I guess is what I'm trying to say succinctly. I knew them. So number one, I had that advantage. It wasn't like I was learning that from the get-go. I also knew their lingo. I knew how they talked. I knew how to talk to them. I was just on the other side of the table now. And, but I had instant credibility because I could talk like them, and I knew what they went through in a day. And I just treated it like a conversation. I never thought about selling. I thought, how can I help them? I know that they can give their patient a better experience if they work with us. I know that they can treat a patient quicker. So it's always about solving their problem and being solution oriented. So I guess a consultative sell, but that's how I worked. And I had lunch and learns. I brought pathologists together with, no pressure. This is what we do. Here's a case study. This is how we improved this patient's life. And, the pathologist got to take, credit for it, and the surgical oncologist. So I was very fortunate that when I transferred into something that I knew initially. So I was in the life sciences oncology space initially before I got into, tech. So that made it easier because I knew the ICP, and I could have those higher level conversations from the get go. And I didn't have the mindset like of, oh, this is sales. Nothing changed. It was still a conversation. It's the
Yeah.
same people I'm talking to. I'm just on the other side of the table. I'm just
Yeah.
helping them in a different way. And that
Yes.
was the key. That was the mindset. So I think people get hung up on, whether they have a framework or all these different things, and they literally, it messes with their head. It's
Mm,
just a conversation,
mm, mm.
a
I
good
absolutely love
conversation,
that.
but a conversation.
Yeah, where you sign a contract at the end and exchange lots of money, but it's still just a conversation.
Yeah.
You're right. Hmm. And
Yeah.
did you, as you progress through your career, did you stick within that same area, or have you made some transitions into other things as well?
Yeah, so I'm no longer life sciences oncology. I moved into, financial services for healthcare, which was tech and professional services. I've been straight tech, and now I'm, once again, financial services, tech and professional services. So I'm a far way away from life sciences and oncology where I started.
Hmm.
I, don't talk to pathologists or physicians on a daily basis anymore. But, that experience taught me about the value of truly understanding your customer. So every role that I've taken, that's been different of like, how do I talk to customers? How do I be in the room and just listen, whether it's
Hmm.
with customer service, customer success, like on sales calls, and then how do I just interact with customers with no pressure?
Hmm.
Maybe an advisory board, maybe there's a conference. And that's what I've done to kind of accelerate. So I have my own point of view and can have better conversations with customers when it's, time for me to actually do the job that I was hired to do. But
And,
that research is critical.
and were there any challenges in any of those transitions where actually this was, because it sounds like sales comes not quite naturally to you, but you're good at sales. Were there any transitions or challenges that you had as you were moving through your career?
I think just getting, I think I've been fortunate in the sense that, I've had opportunities where people were open. Oh, you can learn
Mm,
this, right? So
mm,
when I went from life sciences oncology to financial services, still in healthcare, but instead of selling to pathologist physicians, I was going to be selling to hospital CFOs.
mm.
I
Scary
had a
people.
leader interviewed me and said, I can teach you the lingo of financial services,
Okay.
and he goes, but you have the skill set that I need, and of being able to have conversations, looking at how we should talk to customers, how we that's the skills that you bring. And
Mm,
so I would just say that I think I've been fortunate that I've had leaders who interviewed me and looked past some of my experience and saw what I brought to the table. And
mm,
obviously, if given the opportunity, I can speak to it. But, I think the ATS is, really hard on people who maybe do have something valuable to offer, but getting past the ATS is a challenge. So I think I've been very fortunate because
mm,
LinkedIn, number one, has been huge for me because I have a personal brand. And number two, when I first took that role with the financial services, I reached out to the recruiter and said, hey, I saw this job description that you have, and I understand what you're looking for, and I know it's a new role, but have you thought about XYZ? Because I
mm.
see that missing. That's what got me the interview with
Wow.
the COO, is
Mm,
because I, had a point of view of what this role should look like if it was going to be a new role in a company.
mm,
And I think that whatever you can do to make yourself stand out is just really, really crucial. But I've
mm,
also had the right person interviewing me. And I mean the right person, someone who was open to just because you don't have this industry experience doesn't mean you can't do this role.
I love that, because that's a really different way to make yourself stand out. It's not just kind of going with what they're saying, but saying, I think I could add value in these different ways, and I think you should consider this. I really like that as an approach.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to find ways to make yourself stand out, for sure.
So one of the things that you mentioned earlier was that you had a bad manager who you took some lessons about what not to do. I'd love to hear some examples of some really good leaders that you've had, and, you know, maybe the top thing that you learned from each of those people.
Yeah. So, early on, Jessica Landestrate, she was a key leader for me who, in a startup, number one, she, gave me confidence in myself. Like whenever I doubted, she's like, "Why are you doubting yourself? You've done XYZ before. Why do you think you can't do this?" And so she was my biggest, champion, and basically told me there isn't anything you can do if you don't set your mind to it. And the only thing stopping you from doing anything is you. So she gave me that really mindset that helped me early on in my career. And she said, always, yes, you're data driven, but also trust your gut. So if there's anything that something's not matching, like even if you have the data, listen to it. There's a reason why, sometimes, even though you can't put your finger on it. So that was super, super instrumental. I, whenever I've had those self-doubts, I'll stop myself, because we all do. Even as a leader, sometimes you get imposter syndrome, whatever you want to call it. And I just like, why am I thinking this way? What is causing this? And usually if I sit down and think about it, it's made up. It's not really truly how I feel. It's just because I'm uncomfortable about something. So for her, that was huge. And that was early in my career. And that made a huge difference, because I can self-check myself. Another great leader, told me, my greatest asset was my adaptability. He said, there isn't a role that I could put you in that you would not figure it out. And that kind of became my mantra to make a motto. Everything is figureoutable. How long's the runway? It really, literally, I will ask, if someone asks me to do something I haven't done before, is how long's the runway? Because that will determine my success. I have built a network. I am not afraid to jump in and form my own opinions and talk to people, and figure stuff out. It's how long's the runway. Everything's figureoutable, but just how long's the runway? That is the kicker.
I love everything is figureoutable. I've never thought of the how long is the runway bit, but that's such an important thing, because how much time do I have? Because you can figure out pretty much anything in any amount of time, but it's kind of like, if I know how much time I have, then I can tell you, yep, I can do that. No, I can't do that. So I love that addition of how long is the runway.
Yeah. And honestly, as VP of sales, when I've taken roles, or considered roles, that's one of my questions to ask, is like, how long is the runway? You see a lot of VP of sales get burnt out or let go because they haven't asked. I don't want to say it's a hard question, but really had that conversation. What does the runway look like? What is the expectations? And depending where that company is at, whether they have their ICP figured out, whether they have product market fit, it makes all the difference. So knowing what your runway is huge.
So you mentioned about, I think your specialism is a bit around go-to-market. So you said earlier that you're a go-to-market leader. What are some of the things that you've found that have made you successful as a go-to-market leader in terms of, so some of the stuff you're talking about now, like product market fit, ICPs. So what are some of the things that you really focus on when you go into a new situation that have made you successful?
I want the data. So I no matter what someone says to me, prove it. And how do you prove it? Data. So, I want to validate. what is being said by looking at the data, because sometimes the data, first off, data never lies. But sometimes how you look at data can give you additional insight. So I always want the raw data before I will form an opinion or believe what they're saying. You can spew facts at me, but until I see the raw data behind it, those are just words. And that's what helps drive decision, because there have been examples where, I'll give you an example. I was mentoring and talking to another leader, and they were considering 2 employees' futures. And they shared some initial information, stats about where they're at. And, at a high level, it looked like one employee was the better choice. But I said, let's look at the data. And all of the data. And when I say all the data, it just like in business, you have to have a 360 view. I want a 360 view of the deals. And it turns out that even though the one seller had lower revenue, much higher retention because they brought on better customers, and in the long run, more profitable deals. So if we had just gone with the quick look, they would have made the wrong decision. So that's just an example. That's just one example that I can think of that comes top of mind. And so I'm always focused on business unit economics and that 360 view when you're looking at data. You can't just look at data in a silo. You have to look at how it impacts everything. And sustainable, profitable business is key, right? We're not profit at all costs. It has to be sustainable.
I think that, so early in my career, so I'm a data person by trade, and early in my career, I worked with sales teams. And so it's so beautiful for me to hear a salesperson say, give me all of the data, the raw data, so that I can really understand it, because it's so easy to cherry pick or use the bit that really goes to your advantage without understanding the bigger picture. So yeah, I had a lot of fun conversations with salespeople. It's like, you can't just use that one little bit. You have to give the client all the data. So yeah, it warms my heart to hear you say that.
Yeah, I think if, I was younger, different situation, I would probably be like RevOps, right? Because they use a lot of data to make things better, right? I would be a RevOps leader, but I love data because, like I said, it doesn't lie, and I use data to tell a story always. That's how I manage up. Is these are the business facts. There's no emotion. These are the facts. This is what the business is telling us.
I love that. So just as we close, our closing tradition is called a Tickfire question. So I'll ask you 3 to 5 questions in quick succession, and then you just give me the first things that come to mind. What are the top 3 things that you hire for?
Fight for?
Sorry, hire for. So what are the things that you're looking when you hire someone?
Oh, hire for. I thought you said
hire
fight.
For.
Hire for. Oh, sorry. So, coachability.
Okay.
Coachability, attitude, and curiosity.
Okay. Cool. What's the best advice that someone's ever given you?
Don't compare yourself to everyone else. OPO, other people's opinion.
Oh, love that. And if you weren't working in sales, what would you be doing?
Probably designing jewelry. Fun fact, I used to have a 6-figure jewelry business. I took a break when the kids were little, so I'd probably go back to doing jewelry. Yeah.
Science, jewelry, tech. It's all like so different. It's very cool. And if you were to go back to the beginning of your career and give yourself some advice, what would you say?
I would say I would have gone to business first versus science.
Interesting.
And I would have, and education's never a waste, but I think that, business is just, it just opened up so many doors for me. And I always had the curious mindset. So I still think that I would have ended up in the same place because of that curiosity. But I would have done business first, because one of the things that came later in my career was learning like the P&L and the financial side of the business. And that's really what kind of accelerated me in leadership, was really understanding business unit economics.
Amazing. Randy, thank you so much for being on the podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation, and I would love it if you could finish with a word of wisdom for those listening.
Own your journey. Own your journey. There's only one you, and just show up authentically.
Amen to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to another episode of What Makes You Tick. I hope that you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed having the conversation.
Absolutely. There's so much value in learning from virtual mentors, people that have already gone through incredible careers, and they've got wonderful stories and lessons that they can share for you to have a bigger and better career in tech. And if you like this sort of content, we've also got a newsletter that we publish weekly called Growth Magnet, all about tech startups, leadership, scaling, and performance. We'll put a link in the show notes, and it'll be fantastic to see your comments on our next post.